Make sure you get it all. If it stains the wood, they will take it out of your tiny paycheck.
The hot tea soaked right through her thin black socks. It felt like liquid fire on her skin. Naomi dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. She grabbed the small white towel from her apron and started wiping the dark liquid off the floor. Her hands moved fast. Seline stood right above her, her sharp high heels inches from Naomi's fingers. "Make sure you get it all," Seline said. She sounded bored. "If it stains the wood, they will take it out of your tiny paycheck." Naomi didn't look up. She kept her head down and wiped the floor until it was completely dry. Then she carefully picked up the empty teacup and put it back on the silver tray. She stood up, her ankle throbbing with a hot, sharp pain. Edward finally put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Naomi. His face was a perfect, smooth mask. He didn't look sorry, he didn't look angry. He looked at her like she was a piece of broken furniture. "Go to the kitchen," Edward said. "Send Maria in here to make a fresh pot." "Yes, sir," Naomi whispered. She turned around and walked out of the living room. Every step sent a fresh wave of pain up her leg, but she forced herself to walk perfectly straight. She was not going to limp. She was not going to let Seline see her hurt. She pushed the heavy kitchen door open and walked in. The second the door swung shut, the strong front she was holding completely shattered. She leaned against the cold marble counter and let out a choked gasp. Maria, the older maid, looked up from the sink. Her eyes went wide. She rushed over and looked at Naomi's leg. "Oh, sweet girl," Maria said quickly. "What happened?" "Miss Park dropped her tea," Naomi breathed. She leaned down and carefully peeled her black sock off. A large, angry red blister was already forming on her ankle. Maria cursed quietly in Spanish. She pulled Naomi to the sink, turned on the cold water and put Naomi's foot right under it. The freezing water shocked the burn, making Naomi hiss, but then it started to numb the pain. "She didn't drop it," Maria said softly, shaking her head. "I know that woman, she is evil, she did it on purpose." "It doesn't matter," Naomi said, staring blankly at the running water. "Mr. Kang saw the whole thing. He told me to clean it up and get out." Maria sighed and patted Naomi's shoulder. "That is how these people are, Naomi. They only care about money and power. We are just the help. We are ghosts to them." "Ghosts?" Naomi slowly touched her flat stomach. A tiny, terrifying secret was growing inside her. A baby that belonged to a billionaire who didn't care if she burned to death on his living room floor. If she stayed a ghost, he would crush her. Seline would destroy her. The fear that had choked her in the bathroom slowly started to fade. Something else took its place, something cold and sharp. It felt like ice water in her veins. She couldn't just survive anymore. She had to fight back. She had to be smart. "Maria," Naomi said, her voice completely steady now. "Mr. Kang wants you to bring them fresh tea. I'll finish washing the dishes." Maria looked at her closely, worried. "Are you sure, your leg?" "I'm fine," Naomi lied perfectly. "Go." For the rest of the day, Naomi avoided the living room. She stayed in the laundry room, washing towels and thinking. She needed money, real money. If she ever wanted to run away and keep her baby safe, she needed cash that Edward couldn't track. She also needed to hide her morning sickness. She had to eat small pieces of dry bread before getting out of bed, and she had to throw up quietly into the sink instead of the loud toilet. The lock on her bedroom door clicked loudly at midnight. Naomi was already sitting up in bed. She was wearing the oversized black shirt Edward gave her on her first night. She watched as the heavy door opened. The hallway was completely dark, but Edward's tall shadow filled the doorway. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. He reached up to loosen his tie, walking toward the bed with slow, heavy steps. He didn't say a word. He expected her to just lay back and take whatever he wanted to give. "Stop," Naomi said. Her voice was quiet, but it was firm. Edward stopped at the edge of the bed. He dropped his tie on the floor. His dark eyes narrowed in the dim light. "What did you say?" "I said stop," she repeated, pulling the thick blanket up over her chest. "I'm sick. I threw up twice today. I think I caught a stomach bug." It was a brilliant lie. It was half true. Edward stared at her for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy and dangerous. He leaned down, placing one hand on the mattress right next to her hip. He reached out with his other hand and pressed the back of his fingers against her forehead. His skin was warm. Naomi forced herself not to pull away. She made herself look completely exhausted. "You don't have a fever," he muttered, his voice low. "My stomach hurts," she added softly. She looked down at her lap. "I don't feel good, Edward." It was the first time she used his real name instead of calling him Sir or Mr. Kang since they started sleeping together. Edward's hand paused on her forehead. He let his fingers slide down her cheek, his thumb resting near her mouth. "You are useless to me if you are sick," he said coldly, but his thumb stroked her skin once very gently before he pulled his hand away. He stood up straight. "Sleep. If you aren't better by tomorrow, I will call my private doctor." Panic hit Naomi's chest like a hammer. A doctor would take her blood, a doctor would know immediately. "No," she said quickly, sitting up taller. "No, please, I just need sleep. It's just something I ate. I promise I'll be fine tomorrow." Edward watched her panic. His eyes got very dark. He always liked it when she was scared. He thought it meant he was winning. "Fine," he said smoothly. He picked his tie-up off the floor. "Be in the kitchen at 6, don't be late." He turned and walked out of the room. The lock clicked back into place. Naomi let out a massive breath and fell back onto the pillows. She survived tonight, but she couldn't fake a stomach bug forever. The clock was ticking. 2 days later, the real danger found her. It was raining again. Naomi was pulling 2 heavy black trash bags down the long driveway toward the main gate. The service workers usually picked them up, but Maria's back was hurting, so Naomi offered to do it. The bags were heavy, pulling on her arms and making her stomach cramp. She reached the massive iron gates and tossed the bags into the large green bins. She wiped the rain off her face and turned around to walk back to the house. Well, look who moved up in the world." Naomi froze. The voice came from the dark shadow of the stone wall near the gate. A man stepped out into the dull grey light. He was wearing a dirty brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. He smelled strongly of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. It was her Uncle Marcus. Naomi's heart dropped into her stomach. Marcus was her mother's brother. He was a gambler, a liar, and a complete leech. He only came around when he wanted money. "What are you doing here?" Naomi asked, looking around quickly to see if the security guards were watching. The guard shack was completely empty right now. "I came to see my favorite niece," Marcus grinned. His teeth were yellow and crooked. He walked closer, looking past her at the giant mansion on the hill. "Nice place. A lot better than that dump you lived in." "I work here," she said sharply. "You can't be here, it's private property." "Oh, I know," he chuckled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I went to visit your dear sweet grandmother a few days ago. Imagine my surprise when the nursing home said she was gone, moved to Silver Pines." Naomi stopped breathing. "Silver Pines," Marcus said, whistling low. "That place costs 20 grand a month. Now I know you don't have 20 grand, Naomi. You barely had $20 last time I saw you." "That's none of your business," she snapped, taking a step back. "It became my business when I asked the nurses who was paying for it," Marcus smiled. The smile was completely ugly. "They said a very nice man named Edward Kang paid the whole bill, the billionaire CEO, the guy who is going to marry the shipping heiress next month." He took another step closer, trapping her against the cold iron gate. "So, tell me, little Naomi, why is a billionaire paying for your grandmother's fancy hospital bed? What exactly are you doing in that big house to earn that kind of money?" "I'm his maid," she said, her voice shaking. She hated that he saw her fear. "Bullshit," Marcus spat. "Rich men don't buy private suites for maids, they buy them for their toys." Naomi raised her hand and shoved his chest hard. "Shut up, get away from me." Marcus didn't even move. He just grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully tight. "Don't touch me, you little brat. You hit the jackpot, I know it, and I want my cut." "I don't have any money," she yelled, trying to pull her arm away. "Then get some," he growled in her face. His breath smelled terrible. "Tell your rich boyfriend to give you a bonus. Or maybe I should go talk to his beautiful fiancée. I'm sure Seline Park would love to know that her future husband is paying for his dirty little maid's family." The threat hit Naomi like a physical blow. If Seline found out, she would ruin everything. She would fire Naomi, cancel her grandmother's care, and throw them both on the street. "If you do that, he will cut me off completely," Naomi lied fast. Her brain was working in overdrive. "If he cuts me off, I have nothing, and you get nothing." Marcus stopped. He thought about it. His grip on her wrist loosened just a little bit. I get paid next Friday, Naomi said quickly, her voice low and desperate. I can give you $1,000, but you have to leave right now and never come back here. 5,000, Marcus smiled greedily. I don't make that much, she cried. 2,000, that's every penny I have. Take it or go talk to Seline and get zero. Marcus let go of her wrist. He pointed a dirty finger at her face. 2,000, next Friday. I'll be waiting right here at the gate at 8 o'clock at night. If you aren't here, I go straight to the gossip blogs. He turned around and walked away, disappearing down the wet tree-lined street. Naomi leaned against the cold iron gate. Her whole body was shaking violently. She rubbed her sore wrist. $2,000. She didn't have $20 to her name. Edward owned her entire paycheck to pay off the broken watch and the hospital bills. She had literally nothing. She looked up at the giant, dark house. She was trapped in a cage with a monster, hunted by an evil woman and blackmailed by her own blood. And she was doing it all while carrying a baby that could get her killed. She couldn't play defense anymore. She had to go on the attack. The very next afternoon, Seline decided to bring her torture to a new level. The front doors banged open, and Seline marched in, followed by 3 women in sharp grey suits. They were carrying a massive, heavy white garment bag. It was Seline's wedding dress. It had just flown in from Paris. Put it in the living room, Seline ordered the women. She took off her coat and threw it on a chair. She looked around and spotted Naomi dusting a side table. You, Seline snapped, pointing her finger, come here. Naomi put the duster down and walked over. She kept her face completely blank. The 3 women unzipped the giant bag. The dress was huge. It was covered in heavy pearls, thick lace, and an insanely long train that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. It was beautiful, but it looked like a nightmare to wear. The tailor is coming in an hour to do the final fitting, Seline said, looking at the dress with greedy eyes. But I need to see how the train looks when I walk. Pick it up. Naomi looked at the huge pile of heavy white fabric on the floor. Miss Park, the dress looks very heavy. Maybe we should wait for the tailor. Did I ask for your opinion? Seline hissed, stepping closer. I told you to pick it up. You are the maid, do your job. Naomi pressed her lips together tightly. She bent down and gathered the heavy train in her arms. It was shockingly heavy. The pearls dug into her skin, and the thick layers of fabric immediately made her arms ache. Stand back, Seline ordered. Naomi stepped back. Seline stood in front of the large mirror on the wall, posing and turning. Walk with me, Seline said. She started walking around the massive living room. Naomi had to follow her, holding the heavy train up so it wouldn't touch the floor. They walked in circles. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes. Naomi's arms were burning. Her back ached and her stomach cramped. The sickness she felt earlier that morning rushed back. She felt dizzy. Hold it higher, Seline yelled, looking over her shoulder. You are letting it drag. It's very heavy, Naomi managed to say, her breathing coming fast. Seline stopped suddenly and spun around. Naomi didn't expect it. She stumbled forward, trying not to drop the dress. Seline lifted her foot and brought her sharp, pointed high heel down violently right on Naomi's foot. She aimed perfectly for the ankle she had burned with the tea 3 days ago. Naomi let out a sharp cry of pure agony. The heavy dress slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor. She dropped to her knees, grabbing her ankle. The pain was blinding. You stupid girl, Seline screamed at the top of her lungs. You dropped my dress, you ruined it. You stepped on me, Naomi yelled back, the pain ripping away her carefully planned silence. I stepped backward, Seline lied flawlessly, her eyes wide with fake shock. You are clumsy and entirely useless. What is going on in here? The deep, booming voice stopped both of them. Edward stood at the top of the glass staircase. He was wearing his suit pants and a white shirt. He looked angry, very angry. He walked down the stairs fast, his eyes locked on the pile of white fabric and Naomi kneeling on the floor holding her ankle. Edward, thank God you are here, Seline said quickly. Her voice changed instantly, becoming sweet and whiny. She rushed over to the bottom of the stairs. This terrible girl just ruined my dress. She dropped it on the floor. She is so clumsy. I want her fired right now. Throw her out. Edward walked past Seline. He didn't even look at her. He walked right up to Naomi. He looked down at her. He saw the tears of pain shining in her eyes. He saw the way she was holding her ankle, the exact same ankle Seline spilled the tea on. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what had happened. For a second, Naomi thought he was going to help her. She thought he was going to yell at Seline. She looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs, begging him with her eyes to defend her. Edward looked away from her. He looked at the white dress on the floor. Seline, Edward said. His voice was cold, completely empty of any emotion. Your dress is fine, pick it up. Seline gasped, excuse me. I said the dress is fine, he repeated, turning his head slowly to look at his fiancée. But if you don't like my staff, you can leave. You are making too much noise in my house. Celine's mouth dropped open. She turned bright red with embarrassment and anger. She opened her mouth to argue, but the cold, dead look in Edward's eyes stopped her. She grabbed her coat from the chair, shot a look of pure hatred at Naomi, and stormed out the front door, slamming it shut behind her. The house went completely silent. Naomi slowly let go of her ankle. It was throbbing, but she could still move it. She looked up at Edward. He was staring at the door Seline just walked through. Get up, he ordered softly. He didn't offer his hand. Naomi pushed herself off the floor. Her legs shook, but she stood tall. She glared at him. Why do you let her do that to me? Naomi asked. Her voice cracked, but she didn't care anymore. You know she did it on purpose. You know she spilled the tea. You know she stepped on me. Why do you let her hurt me? Edward turned his head and looked at her. His face was a stone wall. She is my fiancée, he said simply. She has a role to play. You have a role to play. Enduring her temper is part of your job. The words felt like a knife twisting in Naomi's chest. Enduring her temper. That was all Naomi was to him, a punching bag for his future wife and a warm body for his bed at night. My job is to clean your house, Naomi said quietly, her voice full of ice. Not to be abused by your crazy girlfriend. Edward took a slow step toward her. The air in the room got very heavy. Careful, Naomi, you forget who you are talking to, you forget who owns you. I don't forget anything, she whispered, staring right back into his dark eyes. She turned around and walked away from him. She limped slightly, but she didn't look back. As she walked down the hall toward her room, the plan finalized in her mind. She couldn't fix him, she couldn't reason with him, she had to destroy him. She reached her room, locked the door, and pulled her phone out of her pocket. She needed $2,000 by Friday to pay off her uncle. Edward wouldn't give it to her, so she was going to steal it from him. She remembered the small black velvet box under his pillow, the massive diamond engagement ring, the ring that was just a business contract. He said he didn't care about the ring. He said he didn't care about the fairy tale. Naomi touched her stomach again. We are going to survive, she whispered to the quiet room. I promise. She set her alarm for 2 a.m. When the house was completely dark and silent, she was going to sneak into the master bedroom. She was going to take the ring, sell it at a pawn shop on the edge of town, pay off her horrible uncle, and use the rest of the cash to buy 2 bus tickets out of Seattle forever. It was a crazy, dangerous plan. If Edward caught her, he would likely kill her or lock her away forever. But she had no impossible choices left. She was a mother now, and a mother would burn the whole world down to protect her child. The digital clock by her bed flipped to 2:00 a.m. The small green numbers were the only light in the dark room. Naomi slowly pulled the thick blankets off her legs. She didn't put on her shoes. She needed to be completely silent. She wore only the oversized black t-shirt Edward had given her. She walked to her bedroom door and pressed her ear against the cold wood. Nothing. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the wind howling outside the thick glass windows. She turned the handle as slowly as she could. It clicked loud in the silent hallway. She held her breath, waiting. No doors opened. No footsteps came toward her. She slipped out into the long, dark hallway. Her bare feet made absolutely no sound on the wood floor. She walked down the hall toward the master bedroom. Every shadow looked like a security guard. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a gunshot. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt her ribs. She was sweating, even though the air conditioning was on high. She reached his door. It was slightly open. Edward never fully closed it when he slept alone. Naomi pushed the heavy wood open just enough to slip her body through. The room was massive and pitch black, except for the pale moonlight cutting through the curtains. It smelled heavily of his cedar cologne and clean soap. She looked at the giant king-sized bed. Edward was laying on his stomach. One strong arm hung off the side of the mattress. The grey silk sheet covered the lower half of his back, leaving his wide shoulders bare. He was breathing in a slow, deep rhythm. He was completely asleep. Naomi tiptoed across the soft rug. She stopped right next to his side of the bed. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into tight fists to stop it. The ring was under his pillow. She knew he kept it there. She reached out slowly. Her fingers brushed against the cool silk pillowcase. She slid her hand under the edge. The space between the pillow and the mattress was tight. She pushed her hand deeper, her knuckles brushing against the side of his face. Edward let out a low grumble and shifted his head. Naomi froze. She stopped breathing completely. Her hand was trapped under his pillow. If he woke up right now, if he opened his eyes and saw her stealing his $3 million ring, he would kill her. He didn't wake up. He settled back into a deep sleep, his breathing going slow and steady again. Naomi pushed her fingers another inch. She felt something hard, the velvet box. She grabbed it tight and slowly pulled her hand back out. The small black box sat heavy in her palm. She didn't waste a second. She turned and walked as fast as she could without running right out the door. She slipped down the hall, went into her room, and locked the door perfectly. She leaned against the door and slid down to the floor, panting quietly. She opened her hand. She pressed her thumb against the front of the box and popped it open. The giant square diamond stared back at her in the dark. It was a cold, beautiful rock that ruined lives. Tomorrow it was going to save hers. The next morning, Naomi hid the ring inside her bra. It was the only place she knew Edward wouldn't look during the day. It felt heavy and sharp against her chest, a constant reminder of the dangerous game she was playing. She found Maria in the kitchen chopping vegetables for lunch. "Maria," Naomi said, faking a small cough, "I feel terrible. I need to go to the pharmacy in town to get some cold medicine. Can you cover my sweeping for 2 hours? Mr. Kang is at the office all day." Maria looked at her pale face and nodded quickly. "Of course, child. Go get your medicine, you look like a ghost." Naomi grabbed her cheap coat and hurried out the back door. She walked down the long driveway in the freezing rain and waited for the bus. She rode it for an hour, passing the nice parts of Seattle and going straight into the dirty, crowded part of the city. She got off at a corner filled with broken streetlights and graffiti. She pulled her hood up and walked quickly down the sidewalk until she found a neon sign that read "Cash for Gold." The light was flickering. She pushed the door open. A little bell rang. The shop smelled like old smoke and dust. The walls were lined with cheap guitars, stolen TVs, and dirty jewelry. A large man with a thick, messy beard sat behind a thick wall of bulletproof glass. "What do you want?" the man asked. His voice was rough, like he swallowed glass. Naomi walked up to the counter. She looked around to make sure the tiny shop was empty. It was. She reached into her shirt, pulled out the black velvet box, and slid it under the small opening in the glass. The man picked it up lazily. He opened it. His eyes went wide. He sat up straight. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a small magnifying glass, and held it to his eye. He stared at the diamond for a long time. "Where did you get this?" he asked, looking at her cheap coat and wet hair. "It was a gift," Naomi lied. Her voice was flat. She channeled Edward's coldness. She pretended she was as ruthless as the man she stole it from. "I want to sell it." The man laughed an ugly, wet laugh. "A gift? Sure it was, sweetheart. This is a custom cut, flawless. It's worth a fortune. If I try to sell this, the cops will be at my door in 10 minutes. "Then don't sell it whole," Naomi said, staring right back at him. "Cut it down, melt the silver. I don't care what you do with it. I just want cash." The man set the box down. He rubbed his dirty beard. He knew she was desperate. He knew it was stolen. That meant he could cheat her. "I'll give you 3,000, he said. $3 million for 3,000. It was a joke, but Naomi didn't care about the real value. She just needed enough to pay her uncle and buy 2 bus tickets out of the state. 5,000, she demanded, keeping her voice completely steady, "or I take it to the shop down the street." She reached her hand under the glass to grab the box. The man slammed his heavy hand down on top of hers. He smiled, showing missing teeth. 5,000, fine, but you sign a paper saying it belongs to you. If the cops come, I don't know you." "Deal," she said, pulling her hand back. The man reached into a safe under the counter and pulled out a stack of $100 bills. He counted out 50 bills and pushed them through the slot along with a piece of paper and a pen. Naomi signed a fake name, grabbed the money, and shoved it deep into her coat pocket. She walked out of the shop and back into the rain. She had $5,000. She was halfway to freedom. By Friday night, the rain had turned into a massive thunderstorm. Lightning flashed across the sky, turning the dark mansion bright white for a split second. Edward was out at a fancy charity dinner with Seline. He wasn't expected back until after midnight. The timing was perfect. At exactly 8 o'clock, Naomi put on her boots and her wet coat. She put $2,000 in her left pocket and the remaining $3,000 in her right. She walked out the front door and marched down the long driveway toward the main gate. The wind whipped her hair across her face. The cold bit into her skin, but she felt hot with adrenaline. This was it. She was going to pay the devil at the gate, go back to her room, pack her bags, and disappear into the night before Edward ever got home. She reached the tall iron gates. Marcus was already there. He was huddled under a black umbrella, smoking a cigarette. He looked like a rat hiding from a flood. "I was starting to think you weren't going to show. Little niece," Marcus grinned, dropping the cigarette and stepping on it. Naomi didn't waste time. She reached into her left pocket, pulled out the thick stack of bills, and shoved them through the iron bars of the gate. Marcus grabbed the money greedily. He quickly flipped through the bills with his thumb. His eyes lit up. He had never held this much money in his life. $2,000, Naomi said loudly over the sound of the rain. "Just like you asked. Now leave. Don't ever come back here. Don't ever talk to me or my grandmother again." Marcus finished counting. He folded the money and put it into his jacket pocket. He looked up at her, and his ugly smile grew wider. He grabbed the iron bars with both hands and leaned close. "You really are stupid, Naomi," he laughed. "You work for a billionaire. You just handed me $2,000 in cash without even blinking. That tells me you can get a lot more." Naomi's blood ran completely cold. The rain hitting her face felt like ice. "We had a deal." "Deals change," Marcus sneered. $2,000 is nice for the weekend, but I think I deserve a monthly allowance. Let's say $5,000 next Friday. If you don't have it, I go straight to the future Mrs. Kang." He turned around and started walking away, laughing into the wind. "Marcus," Naomi screamed, grabbing the wet bars. "You can't do this, I don't have any more." He didn't look back. He disappeared into the dark street. Naomi stood at the gate for a long time. The thunder crashed above her. She felt completely sick. She was so stupid. Edward always told her that desperate people run. He told her that bad people never stop taking. She should have listened to him. Paying a blackmailer never works. They always come back for more. She couldn't stay here. Even if she sold 100 stolen rings, Marcus would drain her dry. And when the money ran out, he would destroy her anyway. She turned around and ran back up the driveway. Her boots splashed loudly in the deep puddles. She had to leave tonight. Right now. She still had $3,000 in her pocket. It was enough for a bus ticket to California. She would figure out how to get her grandmother out of Silver Pines later. Right now she had to save the baby. She burst through the front door of the mansion. She locked it behind her, breathing heavily. She stripped off her wet coat and threw it on the floor. She ran up the glass stairs, ignoring the burning pain in her ankle. She reached her bedroom, opened the door and dropped to her knees. She pulled her broken suitcase out from under the bed and threw it open. She didn't care about folding. She started grabbing jeans, shirts, and socks from her small dresser, throwing them into the bag. She grabbed the folder with her grandmother's medical papers. She stuffed it into the front pocket. Come on," she whispered to herself, zipping the broken zipper as fast as she could. She stood up and grabbed the handle of the suitcase. She was ready. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. It sounded like a piece of furniture being thrown against a wall. Naomi froze. Heavy, fast footsteps came stomping down the wood floor. They were moving straight toward her room. Before she could even take a step back, her bedroom door was kicked violently open. The heavy wood slammed against the wall with a deafening crack. Edward stood in the doorway. He was completely soaked in rain. His expensive black suit was ruined. His tie was gone and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the top. He looked like a wild animal. He looked like a killer. In his right hand he held the small black velvet box. The lid was open. It was completely empty. He looked down at the suitcase by Naomi's feet. Then his pitch-black eyes slowly locked onto her face. "Where are you going, Naomi?" he asked quietly. The softness of his voice was far more terrifying than if he had screamed. Edward didn't yell. His quiet voice was so much worse. He stepped into the bedroom. Rainwater dripped from his black hair onto the expensive wood floor. He looked at the broken zipper on her cheap suitcase. He looked at her wet boots. "I asked you a question," he said. He threw the empty black velvet box. It hit the wall right next to her head and bounced onto the floor with a sad thud. "Where were you going, Naomi?" Naomi's heart beat so fast it hurt her throat. She couldn't speak. She looked at his hands. They were curled into tight fists. "And where is my ring?" he asked. He took a slow step toward her. The floorboards creaked under his wet shoes. "I don't have it," she whispered. Her voice shook badly. "I know you don't have it," he snapped. The ice in his voice cracked, showing the burning, violent anger underneath. "The safe in my office has hidden cameras, Naomi, but I didn't even need to check them. I smelled your cheap soap on my sheets. I know you took it." He took another step. He was right in front of her now. The smell of rain and dark cologne filled her nose. "Did you sell it?" he asked. "Did you pawn a custom $3 million diamond just to buy a bus ticket?" "Yes," she lied quickly. She had to make him think it was just about escaping him. Edward let out a harsh, ugly laugh. He reached down and grabbed the front of her black coat, pulling her up onto her toes. He pulled her so close she could feel the heat rolling off his angry body. "You are a terrible thief," he growled, his face inches from hers. "Where is the money?" Before we find out if Edward discovers Naomi's darkest secret, take a second to hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to push more dark romance audiobooks your way. What do you think Naomi should do right now? Would you rather lie straight to a dangerous man's face, or break down and tell him everything? Do you think he's going to hurt her, or is he going to do something much more twisted to keep her trapped? Have you ever been caught completely red-handed doing something you weren't supposed to do? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you love the gritty drama, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter. Naomi gripped his wet wrists. His skin was freezing cold from the storm outside. "I spent it," she gasped, trying to push him away. "On what?" he yelled. The loud sound bounced off the walls, making her flinch. "You haven't left the house, you went to the front gate. The security guards saw you on the cameras, they called me. That is why I came home early." Naomi felt the blood completely leave her face. The guards saw her. They saw her meet her uncle. "Who was at the gate, Naomi?" Edward demanded. He shook her once hard. "Who did you give my ring to?" "Nobody," she cried out. "I sold it in the city today. I took the money to the gate to pay someone." Edward's dark eyes narrowed. He let go of her coat, but before she could step back, his hands moved down. He grabbed the pockets of her wet coat. He shoved his hand inside her right pocket. He pulled out the thick stack of $100 bills. Naomi squeezed her eyes shut. It was over. Edward looked at the money. He flipped the thick paper bills with his thumb. His face twisted in pure confusion and then extreme anger. $3,000, he said. His voice was dangerously soft again. "You sold a flawless, rare diamond for a few $1,000s. "I just needed enough to leave," she said, wrapping her arms around her chest. "I needed to get away from you." Edward threw the stack of money right at her face. The heavy paper hit her cheek and fell to the floor, spreading out over the rug like dead leaves. "Don't lie to me," he roared. He stepped into her space, backing her up until her back slammed hard against the wall. He put his hands on the wall on both sides of her head, trapping her completely. "You didn't keep all the money. The guards saw you hand something through the gate. Who did you pay?" "It doesn't matter," she sobbed, turning her head away from him. She couldn't tell him about Marcus. If Edward found Marcus, he might kill him. Or worse, Marcus would tell Edward about her grandmother, and Edward would use that to hurt her more. "It matters because you stole from me," Edward hissed, leaning his face so close his nose brushed her cheek. "You stole from me, you lied to me, and you tried to run away. After everything I did for you. After I paid for your grandmother's care. After I gave you a place to live." "You didn't give me anything," Naomi screamed back, pushing her hands flat against his hard chest. The anger finally burned through her terrible fear. "You put me in a cage. You let your crazy fiancée burn me with hot tea. You let her step on me. You treat me like a piece of trash during the day, and then you use my body at night. I hate you. I wanted to run away because you are a monster." Edward's jaw tightened. A thick muscle twitched in his cheek. He looked down at her lips, then up at her angry, crying eyes. "I am not a monster," he whispered roughly. "I am the only thing keeping you safe." Safe from what? She laughed, a crazy, broken sound leaving her throat. You are the one hurting me. You think Seline would let you live if she knew what we do in this room? He asked, his voice dripping with dark poison. You think she would just walk away? Her family destroys people for fun. I ignore you during the day so she doesn't see how much I want to rip her head off when she looks at you. Naomi stopped pushing. She stared at him. Her breathing was fast and shallow. What? She breathed. I told you, Edward said, his thumb coming up to wipe a tear off her cheek. He smeared the wet drop across her skin. You belong to me. Nobody touches what is mine, not even her. I let her play her little games because she leaves in 2 months. The wedding is fake. The marriage is just a business merger. It means nothing. It means something to me. Naomi pushed his hand away. I will not be your dirty secret. I will not be your toy while you stand at an altar with her. You will be exactly what I tell you to be, he ordered. His grip on her hips was tight and bruised her skin. Suddenly a sharp, twisting pain ripped through Naomi's stomach. It was worse than the morning sickness. It was the stress, the fear, and the crazy adrenaline crashing down on her all at once. She gagged loudly. She shoved Edward as hard as she could. He stumbled back, completely surprised. Naomi covered her mouth with her hand and ran to her small bathroom. She fell to her knees in front of the toilet and threw up. Her whole body shook violently. She coughed, gasping for air, hot tears streaming down her face. She heard his slow, heavy footsteps behind her. Edward walked into the bathroom. He stood over her. He didn't offer to hold her thick hair. He didn't offer a wet towel. He just stood there and watched her suffer. Naomi flushed the toilet and leaned her head against the cool tile wall. She was so tired. She didn't want to fight anymore. She just wanted to sleep. How long have you been sick? Edward asked. His voice sounded different. It wasn't angry anymore. It was cold and calculating. A week, she lied, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. It's a bad bug. Edward looked at the trash can next to the sink. It was the exact same trash can where she hid the plastic tests. She had taken the trash out yesterday, so it was empty, but his dark eyes lingered on it for a long time. A stomach bug doesn't make you throw up every single morning and then act completely fine by the afternoon, he said slowly. Naomi's heart stopped beating. He noticed. Of course he noticed everything. It's just stress, she whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the floor tile. You stress me out. Edward crouched down. He grabbed her chin in his large hand and forced her to look at him. His dark eyes searched her face. He looked at her pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, and the slight fullness of her cheeks that wasn't there a month ago. When was your last cycle, Naomi? He asked quietly. The question felt like a bullet, hitting her straight in the chest. I don't know, she stammered, trying to pull her face away. His grip only tightened. I don't track it, I told you I'm just stressed. Edward didn't let go. He stared at her for a long, terrible minute. The silence in the bathroom was so loud it made her ears ring. His eyes slowly dropped down to her stomach. He let go of her chin. He reached out and placed his large, warm hand flat against her lower belly, right over her wet coat. Naomi stopped breathing. She squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't look at him. You are pregnant, Edward stated. It wasn't a question, he knew. Naomi let out a broken sob. Please, she begged, opening her eyes. Please don't hurt it. Please don't take it away from me. I'll do anything. I'll work for free forever. Just let me keep it. Edward's face was completely unreadable. He looked at his hand resting on her stomach. Then he looked up at her crying face. He didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He stood up slowly. He looked down at her like she was a completely different person. Get up, he said. What are you going to do? She cried, staying on the floor. I said get up, he ordered. His voice was hard, giving her absolutely no room to argue. Naomi slowly pushed herself off the floor. Her legs felt weak and useless. She leaned heavily against the sink. Edward stepped closer. He reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the bathroom and back into the bedroom. He walked over to her broken suitcase sitting on the floor. He kicked it hard. The suitcase flipped over, dumping her cheap shirts and jeans across the rug. You are not leaving, he said, turning back to face her. You are never leaving this house again. You can't keep me here, she yelled. I am having a baby. I need to see a doctor. I need to prepare. You will see my doctors, Edward said coldly. They will come here. You will not step foot outside those front gates. If you try to run again, I will lock you in a room with no windows. You're insane, she whispered, staring at him in total shock. You are marrying Seline in 2 months. What are you going to do when she finds out your maid is pregnant? A dark, twisted smile finally touched Edward's lips. It was the scariest thing Naomi had ever seen in her entire life. Seline is not my problem anymore, he said softly. He walked toward Naomi, backing her up until the back of her legs hit the edge of the bed. She thinks she is going to run my life. She thinks she can touch what belongs to me. He reached out and grabbed both sides of Naomi's face, forcing her to look up at him. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones. You gave me the perfect weapon, Naomi, he whispered, his eyes dark and burning with crazy possessiveness. A billionaire heir, my heir, the one thing her rich family cannot buy. I am not a weapon, she sobbed, shaking her head. It's my baby. It is our baby, he corrected her sharply. And because of it you just moved from a maid to a queen, but a queen who lives in a very tight cage. He leaned down and kissed her hard. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was rough, claiming her, stamping his ownership on her mouth. Naomi didn't kiss him back. She just stood there, completely numb. He pulled back. He looked at her wet hair and pale face. Take off those wet clothes, he ordered. Get into bed. I am going to make a phone call. Who are you calling at 3 a.m, she asked softly. I am calling Seline's father, Edward said, turning toward the heavy wood door. I am going to break the engagement, and then I am going to destroy his entire company. He walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. Naomi stood by the bed. Her mind was spinning out of control. He wasn't going to hide the baby. He wasn't going to pay her to go away. He was going to use her baby to blow up his entire world, and he was taking her down with him. She looked at the $100 bills scattered across the floor. Her escape plan was completely dead. Her uncle was still out there, waiting for money. And now she was trapped in a billionaire's war, holding the one thing everyone would want to control or destroy. She touched her stomach again. The secret was out, and the real danger was just beginning. Naomi stood completely still for a long time after Edward walked out. The open door looked like a black hole waiting to swallow her. The $100 bills were still scattered across the rug. They looked like dirty pieces of paper now. Her escape plan was dead. She slowly sank to her knees. Her wet clothes stuck to her cold skin. She reached out with shaking hands and started picking up the money. She counted the bills, 30 of them, $3,000. She stacked them neatly, folded them in half, and walked over to the giant bed. She lifted the heavy mattress and shoved the money deep underneath. If Edward was going to lock her in a cage, she needed to keep her secret weapon. She would need cash when the time came to fight back. She went to her small bathroom, peeled off her freezing wet clothes and put on a warm grey sweater. She crawled into the massive king-sized bed. The grey silk sheets felt like ice. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. She didn't sleep a single minute. Her brain worked in overdrive. She was pregnant. The baby growing inside her belonged to the most dangerous man in Seattle. He was going to use this baby to destroy another billionaire's family, Seline's family. And when rich people went to war, the poor people caught in the middle usually died. She had to become smart. Crying wasn't going to save her. Running blindly wasn't going to save her. She had to start playing the game, and she had to play it better than Edward. The sun finally came up. It was a dull, grey morning. The rain had stopped, but the sky looked heavy and mean. At 7 o'clock, the heavy wooden door pushed open. Edward walked in. He was wearing a fresh dark blue suit. He looked perfectly rested, like he hadn't spent the night threatening her and destroying his own wedding plans. Right behind him walked a tall woman with grey hair, carrying a large black medical bag. She wore a sharp white coat. This is Dr. Evans, Edward said smoothly. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked completely in control. She works for me, only for me. Naomi sat up in the bed, pulling the blankets tight against her chest. I don't need a doctor. Yes, you do, the doctor said. Her voice was flat and professional. She walked over to the bed and set her black bag on the nightstand. She didn't look at the broken suitcase on the floor. She didn't ask why the maid was sleeping in the master bedroom. She just opened her bag and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. Give me your arm. Naomi looked at Edward. He was standing near the door, his hands resting in his pockets. His dark eyes were locked on her. He was watching every single move she made. Naomi slowly held out her arm. She let the doctor wrap the tight band around her skin. The machine beeped and squeezed. Blood pressure is a little high, Dr. Evans said, writing something down on a tablet. I need to take some blood, and then we will do a quick ultrasound to see how far along you are. Here, Naomi asked, her voice shaking just a little. You brought an ultrasound machine here. I bring whatever Mr. Kang tells me to bring, the doctor replied simply. She tied a rubber band around Naomi's arm, found a vein, and slid a sharp needle into her skin. Naomi flinched, but she didn't look away. She watched the dark red blood fill 3 small plastic tubes. That was her blood. That was the proof that she was carrying Edward's heir. After the tubes were full, Dr. Evans pulled out a small, portable machine with a screen. She told Naomi to lift her sweater. Naomi hesitated. She looked at Edward again. He slowly walked closer, stopping right at the edge of the bed. He didn't look away from her stomach. Naomi bit her lip and pulled the grey sweater up, exposing her flat belly. The doctor squirted cold, clear gel onto her skin. It made Naomi shiver. Then the doctor pressed a small plastic wand against her stomach and started moving it around. The screen on the machine flickered to life. It looked like static at first, black and white fuzz, but then the doctor stopped moving the wand. There, Dr. Evans pointed at a tiny, dark circle on the screen. Inside the circle was a small white shape. You are about 7 weeks along. It is very early. The doctor pressed a button on the machine. Suddenly, a fast, rhythmic sound filled the quiet bedroom. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was a heartbeat. It was so fast. It sounded like a tiny, perfect drum. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Hot tears instantly filled her eyes. It was real. There was a real, living baby inside her, her baby. All the fear and planning washed away for just 1 second, replaced by a massive wave of pure love. She reached out and touched the edge of the screen. Edward stood completely frozen. He stared at the little white shape on the screen. He listened to the fast, strong heartbeat. The hard, cold mask on his face completely cracked. His eyes went wide. His breathing got a little faster. He looked down at Naomi, and for the first time he didn't look like a hunter. He looked like a man who just found the most valuable treasure in the entire world. Is it healthy? Edward asked. His voice was rough and thick. Everything looks perfectly normal for 7 weeks, Dr. Evans said, wiping the cold gel off Naomi's stomach with a soft towel. I will test the blood to make sure there are no underlying issues, but she needs to rest. High stress is very dangerous right now. She will have 0 stress, Edward stated softly. He didn't take his eyes off Naomi. The doctor packed up her bag. I will be back next week to check her weight and bring prenatal vitamins. Do not let her do any heavy lifting. Thank you, doctor. The guards will walk you out, Edward said. Dr. Evans left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. The fast whoosh-whoosh sound was gone, but it still echoed in Naomi's ears. She pulled her sweater back down and crossed her arms over her stomach, like she was trying to shield the baby from him. 0 stress, Naomi asked, her voice dripping with dark sarcasm. You are breaking off an engagement with a billionaire heiress. You are starting a corporate war, and you locked me in your bedroom. My life is nothing but stress. Edward walked around the bed and sat down right next to her. He didn't ask permission. He reached out and placed his large hand gently over her crossed arms, pressing right against her stomach. His touch was incredibly warm. The war is my problem, he said quietly. Your only job is to grow my child. You don't clean anymore. You don't cook. You don't leave this floor without a guard. I am not a prisoner, Naomi pushed his hand away. I need fresh air. I need to walk. I need to see my grandmother. You will stay where I can see you, Edward said, his voice going hard again. Seline's father is not a nice man. When I ruin his company, he will look for my weak spot. He will look for you. Then let me go, she begged. Let me take my grandmother and leave. I won't tell anyone it's yours. We will disappear. You can fight your war and we will be safe. Edward's eyes went completely black. He leaned in so close his nose almost touched hers. Never say that again. You are carrying my blood. You are never leaving my sight. You belong in this house and you will stay in this house until the day you die. Naomi stared into his dark eyes. She saw the twisted obsession burning inside him. He really believed he owned her. What about Marcus? She asked softly. She had to test him. She had to see how much power he was really using. My uncle, he knows about Silver Pines. He knows about you. He was the one waiting at the gate. Edward didn't look surprised. He just smirked. It was a cruel, cold smile. Your uncle is no longer an issue, Edward said simply. Naomi's stomach flipped. What does that mean? What did you do to him? I gave him a choice, Edward said, leaning back. Take a one-way plane ticket to a small island in the middle of the ocean, or take a one-way trip to the bottom of the Seattle River. He chose the island. He will never bother you again. Naomi shivered. He sent her uncle away in the middle of the night. He had that much power. He could make people disappear with a single phone call. You see, Naomi, Edward continued, reaching out to tuck a thick curl behind her ear. I protect what is mine. You don't need to steal from me. You don't need to run. If someone threatens you, I destroy them. That is the safest place in the world for you. A cage is still a cage, even if you paint it gold, she whispered. Before Edward could answer, a loud, crashing sound echoed from downstairs. It sounded like the heavy front doors being slammed open. Then a voice started screaming, Edward, get out here. It was Seline, and she sounded completely insane. Edward sighed. He looked annoyed, not scared. He stood up from the bed and smoothed the front of his expensive suit. Stay here, he ordered Naomi. Lock the door, do not open it for anyone but me. What is she doing here? Naomi asked, sitting up. Her father called her, Edward said smoothly. I broke the contract an hour ago. She is angry, I will handle it. He walked out of the room and pulled the heavy door shut. The lock clicked loudly from the outside. He didn't even trust her to lock it herself. Naomi jumped out of bed. She didn't listen to him. She ran to the door and pressed her ear against the cold wood. She needed to know what was happening. She needed to know what her enemies were doing. She heard Edward's heavy footsteps walking down the glass stairs. Then, Seline's voice echoed through the massive, empty house. Are you out of your mind? Seline screamed. The sound of glass shattering followed. She was throwing things. My father is pulling all the shipping boats. He is going to bankrupt you. You can't cancel the wedding. The invitations are already sent. The wedding is off, Seline. Edward's voice was calm and freezing cold. Your father's boats are useless. I bought out his biggest competitor this morning. I don't need your family anymore. You liar, Seline shrieked. Naomi heard the sound of sharp high heels stomping on the wood floor. You need us. You are nothing without this merger. Why are you doing this? We had a deal. The deal changed, Edward replied flatly. Get out of my house. No, Seline yelled. I know there is something else. You don't just throw away $1 billion merger for nothing. Who is she? Naomi held her breath, her hands pressed flat against the door. There is no one, Edward said. Leave, Seline, before I have security drag you out by your hair. It's that little rat, isn't it? Seline's voice dropped. It wasn't screaming anymore. It was a sick, twisted hiss. It's the maid. I saw the way you looked at her when she dropped my dress. You are throwing away our empire for a street rat. Do not talk about her, Edward growled. His voice vibrated through the floorboards. If you ever come near her, I will personally ruin you. She is nothing, Seline screamed, completely losing control. She is a poor, dirty little nobody. I will kill her. I will make sure she wishes she was dead. Naomi stepped back from the door. Her whole body was shaking. Seline wasn't just a spoiled rich girl anymore. She was a dangerous enemy. She had money, she had power, and she had pure hatred burning in her chest. She heard loud scuffling downstairs, the sound of men shouting. The security guards were dragging Seline out. You are going to regret this, Edward. Seline's voice faded as she was pulled out the front door. I will destroy everything you care about. The front doors slammed shut. The house went deadly quiet again. Naomi slowly walked over to the large window overlooking the steep driveway. She peeked through the crack in the curtains. She saw Seline standing in the rain, screaming at the large security guards. Seline got into her bright red sports car and peeled out, the tires smoking on the wet pavement. Seline wasn't going to stop. Naomi knew it in her bones. A broken-hearted, embarrassed billionaire was the most dangerous thing on the planet. Seline was going to start digging. She was going to find out about the baby. And when she did, she wouldn't just try to get Naomi fired. She would try to hurt the baby. Naomi touched her stomach again. The fast, perfect heartbeat played in her mind. Edward wanted to lock her in a cage to protect her, but a cage just meant she was trapped in one place. It meant Seline knew exactly where to find her. I can't just hide, Naomi whispered to the empty room. I have to fight. She needed to become a strategist. She needed to learn Edward's business. She needed to figure out how to get her grandmother out of Silver Pines before Seline's father found her. She needed power. And the only way to get power in this house was to use the one thing Edward was obsessed with. Hers. She turned away from the window. She looked at the giant bed, the expensive silk sheets, and the locked door. She was going to play the game. She was going to make Edward trust her completely. She was going to stop acting like a scared maid and start acting like the queen he said she was. Because a queen didn't just sit in a tower. A queen commanded an army, and she was going to use Edward's army to destroy Seline before Seline could touch her child. The rain finally stopped, leaving the mansion wrapped in a thick, heavy fog. Naomi didn't go back to sleep. She walked into the massive walk-in closet. She looked at her cheap, broken suitcase sitting on the floor. She left it there. Instead, she walked over to Edward's side of the closet. She reached out and touched the soft fabric of his expensive suits. She found a dark grey button-down shirt. She took off her sweater and slipped his shirt on. It was huge on her, falling to her mid-thigh. She rolled up the sleeves. She deliberately left the top 3 buttons undone, exposing her collarbone. She walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the giant bed. She didn't hide under the silk blankets. She sat up straight, crossed her legs, and waited. An hour later, the heavy wooden door clicked open. Edward walked in. He had taken his suit jacket off. He looked tired. His dark hair was messy from running his hands through it. He looked up, expecting to find her crying or sleeping. He stopped completely. His dark eyes dragged over her body. He looked at his grey shirt hanging off her shoulders. He looked at her bare legs. He looked at her face. He saw that the fear was completely gone, replaced by something cold and hard. He slowly closed the door behind him and locked it. "You aren't resting," he said. His voice was low and rough. "I can't rest," Naomi replied. Her voice was steady. It didn't shake at all. "Not when your crazy ex-girlfriend is out there planning to kill me." Edward walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away. He crossed his arms over his chest. "I told you Seline is my problem. I will handle her." "How?" Naomi asked, tilting her chin up. "How are you going to handle a billionaire who just got publicly dumped? She knows about me. She isn't stupid. She's going to figure out why you broke the contract." "Let her figure it out," Edward said smoothly. He took another step closer, his eyes dropping to the open collar of her shirt. "It won't change anything. I bought out her father's biggest competitor. I have my own shipping boats now. The Park family has no leverage over me anymore." "You are thinking like a businessman," Naomi said. She stood up. She was much shorter than him, but she refused to back down. "Seline isn't going to attack your business first. She is going to attack your weak spots. She is going to attack me." Edward uncrossed his arms. He reached out and grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. "You are locked in the safest house in the country. She cannot touch you." "She doesn't have to touch me to hurt me." Naomi pushed her hands flat against his chest. She didn't push him away, she just held him there. "She can find my grandmother. She can find Silver Pines." Edward's jaw tightened. He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. "I doubled the guards at the clinic. Nobody gets on that floor without my direct permission." "Seline has enough money to buy your guards," Naomi argued. Her heart was beating fast, but she forced herself to stay perfectly calm. "Guards are just people. People like money. If Seline offers them $1 million to look the other way for 5 minutes, they will do it, and my grandmother will be dead." Edward didn't speak. He just stared at her. He hated being told he was wrong, but he was smart enough to know she was right. Seline was petty and vicious. She would absolutely go after the old woman to send a message. "Move her," Naomi demanded. Edward raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "Move my grandmother to this house," Naomi said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. "Today, right now. Set up a medical room on the 1st floor. Bring her own nurses. If you really want to protect me, if you really want this baby to be safe, you will bring my family behind these gates." Edward's grip on her waist got tighter. His fingers pressed into her skin. He leaned his face down until his lips were almost touching hers. "You are giving me orders now?" he asked. There was a dark, dangerous thrill in his voice. "I am protecting my child," she answered, looking straight into his black eyes. "And if you are the father you claim to be, you will do it." A slow, twisted smile spread across Edward's face. He liked this. He liked the fire. He had spent his whole life surrounded by people who simply nodded and agreed with him. Now, the woman carrying his heir was looking him in the eye and demanding a fortress. "You look very beautiful when you are angry," he murmured. He leaned in and kissed the skin right below her ear. Naomi shivered, but she didn't pull away. "Are you going to do it?" she asked, turning her head slightly so her lips brushed his jaw. Edward pulled back. He looked at her for one more long second. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and put it to his ear. "This is Kang," he said into the phone. "I want the guest suite on the first floor cleared out. Bring in a hospital bed, heart monitors, whatever she needs. Then take the armored car to Silver Pines. Pack up Mrs. Johnson and bring her here. I want her inside my gates in 2 hours." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the bed. "Done," he said, looking back at Naomi. "She is moving here, are you happy?" "Yes," Naomi breathed. A massive wave of relief washed over her. Her grandmother was going to be safe. Seline couldn't touch her. "Good," Edward said. His voice dropped lower, turning thick and heavy. He reached out and grabbed the collar of the grey shirt she was wearing. "Because you are wearing my clothes, giving me orders and driving me completely crazy, it is my turn to get what I want." He didn't wait for her to answer. He pulled her hard against him and kissed her. This time Naomi kissed him back. She wrapped her arms around his neck and opened her mouth for him. She poured all her nervous energy, all her fear and all her new power into the kiss. Edward let out a loud groan. He grabbed the back of her thighs and lifted her off the floor. Naomi wrapped her legs around his waist. He carried her to the bed and dropped her onto the soft silk sheets, following her down. The cold grey morning outside disappeared. The war with Seline disappeared. There was only the heat of his skin, the sharp smell of his cologne, and the dark, consuming chemistry that tied them together. For the next 2 hours, the bedroom was their entire world. Naomi didn't think about being a maid. She didn't think about the debt. She let him worship her. She let him touch every inch of her, learning the exact way to make him lose control. She realized that her body was the one thing he couldn't buy, and he was addicted to it. When it was over, Edward lay on his back, breathing heavily. Naomi rested her head on his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat. His hand was resting gently on her flat stomach. "I need to know everything," Naomi said quietly into the quiet room. Edward slowly opened his eyes. He turned his head to look at her. "Everything about what?" "Your business," she said. She lifted her head and propped her chin on his chest. "Park Shipping, the new company you bought, everything. If I am going to be locked in this house, I am not going to be blind. I need to know where the bullets are coming from." Edward frowned. "Business is not your concern. It is dangerous and it is ugly." "I grew up with nothing," Naomi shot back. "I know ugly. I know how greedy people think. Your new business partners probably smile at your face and plan to stab you in the back. Seline's father is going to use every dirty trick he knows. 2 heads are better than 1. Edward stared at her. He studied her brown eyes. He saw the sharp intelligence hiding behind them. The intelligence she had used to survive on the streets, to juggle 3 jobs, and to steal a $3 million ring right out from under his pillow. "Park Shipping controls the northern docks," Edward said slowly, deciding to test her. "I bought out completely which controls the southern docks, but the truck drivers' union is loyal to Mr. Park. If the drivers refuse to pick up my cargo from the southern docks, my products sit in the rain and rot. I lose millions every day." Naomi thought about it. She traced a small circle on his bare chest with her finger. "So by the union boss," she said simply. "He hates me," Edward replied, a bitter edge to his voice. "Mr. Park paid for the union boss's daughter to go to a fancy private college. The man is incredibly loyal. He won't take my money." "Every man has a price," Naomi said. She sat up, pulling the grey sheet around her body. "If he won't take your money, find out what he actually wants. Does he gamble? Does he have a secret girlfriend? Does he have a debt he can't pay?" She stopped speaking. A sudden memory hit her like a lightning bolt. "Wait," Naomi said, her eyes going wide. "My Uncle Marcus, the one you sent away." Edward sat up next to her. "What about him?" "He used to work at the northern docks," Naomi said quickly, her brain connecting the pieces. "He was a forklift driver before he got fired for stealing. He still hangs out at the bars near the water. He knows all the union guys. He used to brag about drinking with the union boss." Edward's eyes sharpened. He gave her his full attention. "If Marcus knows the union boss, he knows his secrets," Naomi continued. "Marcus is a rat. He will sell anyone out for $1. You sent him to an island, right? Bring him back or call him. Pay Marcus to give you the dirt on the union boss. Then use that dirt to force the boss to move your trucks." Edward just stared at her. The silence stretched out. Naomi suddenly felt nervous. Maybe she overstepped. Maybe he was going to laugh at her for trying to play billionaire games. Instead, Edward reached out and grabbed the back of her neck, pulling her in for a hard, fast kiss. "You are brilliant," he breathed against her lips. He pulled away, grabbed his phone, and slid off the bed. He walked naked across the room to his closet to get fresh clothes. "I am going to make the call," Edward said, pulling on a pair of dark pants. "If Marcus gives me the right leverage, I can break Park's chokehold on the city before the sun goes down." Naomi smiled. It was a real smile. She wasn't just the pregnant maid anymore. She was the strategist. 2 hours later, a large medical van pulled through the front gates of the mansion. Naomi was standing by the large window in the living room, wearing a soft black dress Edward had ordered one of his assistants to buy for her. She watched as 4 security guards and 2 nurses helped her grandmother out of the van and into a wheelchair. Naomi ran out the front doors and down the stone steps. "Grandma," Naomi cried, running up to the wheelchair. Her grandmother looked confused but happy. She grabbed Naomi's hands. "Baby girl, what is going on? The nurses just packed all my things. They said we were moving to your boss's house." "It's safer here," Naomi said, holding back her tears. She leaned down and hugged the old woman tightly. "You are going to live with me now. You will have the best care in the world right here." Edward walked out the front doors. He was wearing his suit again. He walked down the steps and stood right behind Naomi. He placed his hand on the small of her back. "Welcome to my home, Mrs. Johnson," Edward said politely. "I wanted to make sure Naomi didn't have to worry about traveling to see you. You will stay in the East Wing. It is very quiet." "You are too kind, Mr. Kang," her grandmother smiled brightly. "You treat my Naomi so well." Naomi felt Edward's thumb rub softly against her spine. It was a private, heavy touch. "I take care of my family," Edward said smoothly. He looked down at Naomi. "Take her inside, make sure she is comfortable. I have to go to the office. The union boss suddenly wants to have a meeting." He smirked at Naomi. The plan worked. Marcus had sold out his drinking buddy and Edward now had the weapon he needed. Edward leaned down and kissed Naomi's cheek in front of the nurses and the guards. It was a public claim. He walked over to his waiting black car and got in. The car drove down the driveway and disappeared through the gates. Naomi helped push the wheelchair into the massive house. The East Wing guest room was beautiful. It was painted soft yellow, with huge windows looking out at the private garden. The medical equipment was hidden behind nice wooden screens. It looked like a fancy hotel, not a hospital. After her grandmother was settled in bed and watching TV, Naomi walked out into the main hallway. She felt a rush of adrenaline. She had won the first battle. Seline was locked out, her grandmother was safe, and Edward was listening to her. "Naomi." She turned around. Maria, the older head maid, was standing at the end of the hall. She was holding a silver tray with a glass of water, but her hands were shaking. She looked terrified. "Maria, what's wrong?" Naomi asked, walking quickly toward her. "A package came for you," Maria whispered, looking around the empty hallway as if someone was watching them. It was left at the back gate. The security guards didn't see who dropped it. Maria reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, square black box. It wasn't velvet, it was cheap cardboard. Naomi frowned. She took the box, it felt very light. "Did you open it?" Naomi asked. "No," Maria shook her head, "but it has your name on it, written in red ink." Naomi looked down at the box. The name Naomi was written in sharp, angry red letters. It looked like blood. A cold feeling washed over her. She slowly lifted the lid of the small box. Inside, sitting on a piece of white cotton, was a tiny, perfect pair of white baby shoes. But that wasn't what made Naomi's blood turn to ice. Pierced straight through the middle of the little white shoes was a long, sharp silver needle, and tucked under the shoes was a small piece of paper. Naomi pulled the paper out with shaking fingers. The message was short. "I know your secret, and I am going to cut it out of you." The needle was thick and heavy. It looked like something used to sew thick leather, not soft baby clothes. It was shoved violently straight through the top of the tiny white left shoe, pinning it to the bottom of the cheap cardboard box. Naomi couldn't pull her eyes away from it. Her hands shook so hard the sides of the box rattled. The words on the small piece of paper burned into her brain. "I know your secret, and I am going to cut it out of you." "Naomi?" Maria asked. The older woman took a step closer, her face tight with worry. "What is it? What did they send you?" Naomi snapped the lid of the box shut. The sound was loud in the quiet hallway. She pulled the box tight against her chest, right over her flat stomach. "It's nothing," Naomi said quickly, her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, trying to push the heavy panic back down her throat. "Just a bad joke, a stupid prank." "You are completely pale," Maria argued, reaching out to touch Naomi's arm. "You look like you are going to pass out. Let me call security. Let me call Mr. Kang." "No," Naomi almost shouted. She forced herself to take a deep breath. She couldn't let the staff know. If the staff panicked, the gossip would leak out of the house. Seline would know she hit her target. Seline would know Naomi was terrified. "Don't call anyone, Maria. I will handle it. Please just go back to the kitchen. And do not tell anyone this package came to the back gate." Maria didn't look convinced, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, but you need to sit down. You are shaking." "I will," Naomi lied. She turned and walked fast toward the glass stairs. Every step felt heavy. The tiny shoes inside the box felt like a ticking bomb. Seline didn't just want her fired anymore. Seline wanted blood. Before we see how Edward reacts to this sick threat, please take a second to hit that like button on the video. It really helps the algorithm push more dark romance stories like this straight to you. What do you think Naomi should do with the box? Would you rather hide it so Edward doesn't do something crazy, or show it to him immediately and let him loose on Seline? Do you predict Seline is going to try and sneak into the house, or will she attack Naomi's grandmother first? Have you ever had someone send you a nasty message that made your blood run completely cold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are loving the gritty drama of Naomi's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Naomi ran up the stairs and locked herself in the master bedroom. She walked over to the giant bed and dropped the box on the grey silk sheets. She backed away from it like it was a poisonous snake. She walked into the bathroom and splashed freezing cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was terrified. The old Naomi, the poor maid who broke the watch, would have grabbed her broken suitcase and ran out the back door. She would have hidden in an alley somewhere, hoping the scary rich people would forget about her. But she couldn't run. Her grandmother was downstairs in a hospital bed. Her baby was growing inside her. Seline had backed her into a corner, and the only way out was to fight. And the only weapon she had big enough to fight a billionaire heiress was the monster who owned this house. She dried her face and walked back into the bedroom. She sat in the leather chair in the corner and waited. The sun slowly went down, turning the grey sky completely black. The house was quiet. Naomi didn't eat dinner. She just stared at the little cardboard box on the bed. At 9 o'clock, the heavy bedroom door finally unlocked and swung open. Edward walked in. He looked completely exhausted. His tie was pulled loose and the top 2 buttons of his white shirt were undone. He dropped his leather briefcase on the floor, but despite the tired look on his face, his dark eyes were shining with a sharp, dangerous energy. He looked like a man who had just won a war. He looked at Naomi sitting in the corner in the dark. "The union boss signed the papers," Edward said. His voice was rough. He walked over to a small table and poured himself a glass of dark whiskey. "Marcus gave me exactly what I needed. The boss has a secret gambling debt. I paid it off. Now he works for me. Tomorrow morning, Park Shipping will have 0 trucks to move their cargo. Seline's father is going to lose $10 million by lunch." He took a long drink from his glass. He turned to look at her, expecting her to smile, expecting her to celebrate their victory. Naomi didn't smile. She just pointed a shaking finger at the bed. Edward frowned. He set his glass down on the table. The ice clinked loudly in the quiet room. He walked over to the bed and looked down at the cheap cardboard box. "What is this?" he asked, looking back at her. "It came to the back gate today," Naomi said softly. Her voice sounded dead. "Someone left it for me." Edward reached out and flipped the lid open. He didn't gasp, he didn't yell. The reaction was so much worse than that. Edward went completely, perfectly still. He stopped breathing. He stared down at the tiny white shoes, the thick silver needle pushed through the cotton, and the red ink on the paper. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The victorious energy radiating off him completely vanished, replaced by a dark, heavy, suffocating anger. It was the kind of anger that destroyed entire cities. He slowly reached into the box. His large fingers grabbed the thick silver needle. He pulled it out of the baby shoe. It made a soft, tearing sound. He held the sharp needle up to the light. "Seline," Edward whispered. The name sounded like a curse in his mouth. She knows, Naomi breathed, wrapping her arms tight around her stomach. She knows about the baby. She said she is going to cut it out of me. Edward didn't say a word. He dropped the needle back into the box. He picked up the piece of paper and read the red words. His jaw locked so tight the muscle twitched visibly under his skin. He crushed the paper in his fist. He squeezed it so hard his knuckles turned pure white. Suddenly he turned and threw the crushed paper at the wall. "Security," he roared. The sound shook the glass windows. He didn't wait. He marched to his desk in the corner of the room and slammed his hand down on the intercom button. "I want the head of security in my office right now," Edward yelled into the speaker. "Lock the front gates. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. I want every camera checked for the last 12 hours. He let go of the button and turned back to Naomi. He walked fast across the room and dropped to his knees right in front of her chair. He grabbed both of her hands. His grip was almost too tight, but his hands were incredibly warm. "Did you go outside?" he demanded, searching her face. "Did anyone else come near you?" "No," Naomi said, shaking her head. "Maria brought the box to me. She found it at the gate." "I am going to kill the guards who let this get through," he hissed, his dark eyes burning. "I pay them to build a wall around you, and they let a threat walk right up to my door." "You can't just fire the guards, Edward," Naomi said. She pulled her hands out of his grip and grabbed the sides of his face. She forced him to look directly into her eyes. "The guards aren't the problem. Seline is the problem. You took her father's trucks today. Now she's going to come for me. She is crazy." "She is dead," Edward stated. There was zero emotion in his voice. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. "She is a billionaire," Naomi argued, her voice rising. "She has security too. She has lawyers. You can't just walk up to her house and shoot her. If you go to prison, who is going to protect us?" Edward stared at her. He hated that she was right. He hated that he couldn't just solve this with pure violence tonight. He slowly stood up, pulling away from her hands. He started pacing the floor. He looked like a caged tiger. "I am going to bankrupt her father," Edward muttered, pacing back and forth. "I am going to take every single dollar that family has. When they have nothing left, her private security will quit. Her friends will leave her. Then I will handle her." "That takes too much time," Naomi said, standing up from the chair. "Bankrupting a massive company takes months. I am not waiting months, jumping at every shadow, wondering if she is going to sneak a needle into my food or pay someone to hurt my grandmother downstairs." Edward stopped pacing. He looked at her. "Then what do you suggest, Naomi? You want to play the strategist. Give me a plan." Naomi walked over to the bed. She looked down at the tiny white shoes in the box. The silver needle was resting on the grey silk. She thought about Seline's sharp, hateful face. She thought about the hot tea pouring over her ankle. "We don't bankrupt them quietly," Naomi said slowly. She turned to look at Edward. Her brown eyes were hard and cold. "We embarrass them. We destroy her public image. Seline cares about her reputation more than anything else. She wants to be seen as the perfect, powerful heiress." "Go on," Edward said, crossing his arms. He was listening closely. "You cancel the trucks tomorrow," Naomi said. "Her father's cargo rots on the docks. But you don't just let it rot. You call the news. You leak the story to the business papers. You tell everyone that Park Shipping is failing. You tell them her father can't pay his workers." Edward nodded slowly. "Stock prices will crash instantly." "Exactly," Naomi said. "But that's just business. That doesn't hurt Seline where she actually feels it. We need to humiliate her." "How?" "The wedding," Naomi said. The word tasted bitter in her mouth, but she forced herself to say it. "She already sent the invitations out, right? All her rich friends are talking about it. You broke the engagement privately. Tomorrow you break it publicly. You put out a press release saying you cancelled the wedding because the Park family is corrupt. You make her look like dirty money. No other rich family will ever want to marry her." Edward let out a low, dark chuckle. It wasn't a happy sound. "You are vicious." "I am protecting my baby," she snapped, pointing at her stomach. "She sent me a needle. I am sending a wrecking ball." Edward closed the distance between them. He reached out and grabbed her waist, pulling her hard against his chest. He looked down into her eyes. He looked completely obsessed with her in that moment. "A press release isn't enough," Edward murmured, his face inches from hers. "If we are going to humiliate her, we do it right. Her father is hosting a massive charity gala tomorrow night at the Grand Hotel downtown. 500 guests. Every camera in the city will be there." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "You want to crash the party?" I am still technically on the guest list. Edward smiled a cruel, sharp smile. I am going to walk into that ballroom. I am going to stand on their stage. And I am going to announce to the entire city that I am dropping their company and cancelling the wedding. Naomi stared at him. It was a brilliant, brutal plan. It would completely destroy Seline's social life in one night. Good, Naomi breathed, do it. Edward's smile faded. His dark eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. His grip on her waist got tighter. I am not doing it alone, he said softly. Naomi froze. What? You are coming with me, Edward stated. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. Are you crazy? Naomi pushed against his chest, trying to step back. I can't go to a billionaire's gala. I am your maid. Everyone there knows I am your maid. Seline will lose her mind if she sees me there. That is exactly the point, Edward said. He didn't let her step back. She sent you a threat in the dark. I am going to put you in the light. I am going to walk you into her party wearing a dress that costs more than her car. I am going to show her and everyone else exactly who replaced her. Edward, no, Naomi pleaded, her panic rising again. That puts a massive target on my back. The press will dig into my life. They will find out about my grandmother. They will find out about the baby. They won't find out anything I don't want them to know, he said, his voice going hard. I own the papers in this city, but Seline needs to see you standing next to me. She needs to know that you are not hiding in a corner waiting to be cut. You are my partner, and nobody touches my partner. He reached up and grabbed the back of her neck, tangling his fingers in her thick curls. He held her head in place, forcing her to look at him. You want to fight, he whispered. This is how we fight. We don't hide, we step on their throats. Naomi stared into his black eyes. He was completely serious. He wanted to take the poor girl from the slums and parade her in front of the richest people in the state, just to twist the knife in his ex-fiancee's back. It was dangerous. It was crazy. But as she looked at the silver needle resting in the box on the bed, she knew he was right. If she hid, Seline would keep hunting her. If she stood next to Edward, shining under the bright lights, Seline would have to face the monster directly. Okay, Naomi whispered, her voice shaking just a little bit. I'll go. Edward let out a rough breath. He leaned down and kissed her hard. It was a heavy, claiming kiss. He tasted like expensive whiskey and dark promises. Tomorrow night, Naomi, he said against her lips. Tomorrow night you stop being the maid, you start being the queen. He pulled away, turned around, and walked out of the bedroom to go yell at his security guards. Naomi stood alone in the giant room. She touched her stomach. The game was moving too fast. Tomorrow night she was going to step into a room full of wolves, wearing a target on her back, relying completely on a monster to keep her safe. She just hoped the monster's teeth were sharper than Seline's. The next morning started before the sun even came up. Naomi barely slept. She tossed and turned in the giant bed, thinking about the needle and the tiny shoes. At 7 o'clock the bedroom door opened. Edward walked in, followed by 3 women dressed in sharp black clothes. They were carrying heavy garment bags, makeup cases, and boxes of jewelry. Get up, Edward said. He was already dressed in a dark suit. He looked at his watch. You have 3 hours to get ready. Naomi sat up, pulling the sheet over her chest. Who are they? My styling team, he answered. He walked over to the closet to grab a different tie. They make sure the people who work for me look perfect. Today they are going to make you look like you own the city. The 3 women didn't speak. They moved fast. They pulled Naomi out of bed and into the massive bathroom. They washed her hair with expensive shampoo that smelled like real roses. They scrubbed her skin, painted her nails a dark, sharp red, and sat her down in front of the giant mirror. For 2 hours they worked on her face and hair. They pulled her thick curls up into an elegant style, leaving a few soft pieces around her face. They put dark makeup on her eyes, making them look huge and fierce. They painted her lips a deep red to match her nails. When they were done with the makeup, they brought out the dress. Naomi stopped breathing when she saw it. It was completely black. It wasn't poofy or covered in cheap lace like Seline's wedding dress. It was made of heavy, smooth silk that looked like dark water. It had long sleeves and a high neck, but the back was completely open, dropping down to her waist. Put it on, the head stylist said softly. Naomi stepped into the dress. The silk slid over her skin like a second skin. It fit her perfectly. It was tight around her waist and hips, showing off her figure before falling to the floor in a long, heavy pool of black fabric. The women gave her a pair of sharp black high heels. They were so tall Naomi almost lost her balance, but she forced herself to stand completely straight. The head stylist opened a small black box and pulled out a necklace. It was a thick chain of silver, carrying a single, massive red ruby in the center. She fastened it around Naomi's neck. The heavy stone rested perfectly on her collarbone. "You look beautiful," the stylist whispered, stepping back. Naomi looked at herself in the full-length mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. The scared, tired maid in the cheap uniform was completely gone. The dark circles under her eyes were covered. Her skin glowed. The dark dress and the blood-red ruby made her look powerful. She looked dangerous. The bedroom door clicked open. Edward walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks. The three stylists quickly grabbed their bags and hurried out of the room, shutting the door behind them. Edward didn't move. He just stared at her. His dark eyes slowly dragged over every single inch of her body. He looked at her dark hair, the sharp red lipstick, the heavy ruby, and the tight black silk hugging her curves. The look on his face wasn't just desire anymore. It was pure possession. "Turn around," he ordered. His voice was incredibly low. It sounded like a growl. Naomi slowly turned around, showing him the completely open back of the dress. Her bare skin was exposed all the way down to her lower back. She heard him let out a rough breath. Heavy footsteps came up right behind her. She felt the heat of his body pressing against the back of her dress. He didn't touch her skin. He just stood there, breathing in the smell of the expensive perfume the stylist sprayed on her neck. "You are going to ruin me," Edward whispered. His lips brushed against her ear, making a violent shiver run down her spine. "I am going to walk you into that room, and every man there is going to want to take you from me." "They can't take me," Naomi said quietly, looking at his reflection in the mirror. "You said it yourself, I am locked in a cage." Edward looked up and met her eyes in the mirror. He reached out and lightly traced the open edge of the dress on her back. "Tonight there is no cage. Tonight we burn their world down." He stepped back and held out his arm. Naomi took a deep breath. She placed her hand on his dark suit jacket. Her fingers were shaking slightly, but she squeezed his arm tight to hide it. They walked out of the bedroom and down the glass stairs. The house was completely quiet. As they reached the front doors, Naomi stopped. "Wait," she said. Edward stopped and looked at her. "What is it?" "My grandmother," Naomi said. "I need to check on her before we leave." Edward nodded. He let go of her arm. "Make it fast, the car is waiting." Naomi walked quickly to the east wing. She opened the door to the yellow guest room. Her grandmother was sitting up in the hospital bed, eating a bowl of warm soup. A nurse was sitting in a chair nearby, reading a book. Her grandmother looked up and dropped her spoon. Her eyes went completely wide. "Naomi," the old woman gasped. "Oh my goodness, baby, look at you, you look like a movie star." Naomi walked over and carefully hugged her grandmother so she didn't ruin the dress or the soup. "I have to go to a work event with Mr. Kang tonight. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I am fine, sweet girl," her grandmother smiled proudly. "You go, you look so beautiful. Mr. Kang is very lucky to have such a hard worker." Naomi forced a smile. "I'll be back late, get some sleep." She walked back out to the main hallway. Edward was waiting by the front doors. They walked outside into the cool night air. The sleek black car was idling in the driveway. The driver held the back door open. Naomi slid into the wide leather seat. Edward got in right after her. The heavy door shut, trapping them in the dark silence. The car started moving smoothly down the driveway and out the front gates. The drive to the downtown hotel took 30 minutes. The whole time Edward didn't say a word. He just held her hand on the seat between them. His thumbs slowly rubbed back and forth across her knuckles. It wasn't a sweet gesture. It was a nervous habit. He was getting ready for a fight. "What exactly are we going to do when we get inside?" Naomi asked, breaking the silence. The city lights started to flash through the tinted windows. "We walk in," Edward said, looking straight ahead. "We let the cameras take our picture. We go into the main ballroom. Her father will be giving a speech on the stage. I will interrupt him. I will take the microphone. And I will tell the whole city that I am dropping his company because he is a liar and a cheat." "And what about Seline?" Naomi asked. Her stomach did a nervous flip. "What if she attacks me?" Edward turned his head to look at her. His eyes were completely dark. "If she takes one step toward you, I will break her arm in front of 500 people." He meant it. He completely meant it. Naomi swallowed hard and looked out the window. The car slowed down. They pulled up to the front of the Grand Hotel. It was a massive, old building with huge white pillars and bright gold lights. A long red carpet was rolled out down the front steps. Hundreds of people were standing behind velvet ropes. There were photographers everywhere, holding large cameras with bright flashing lights. "Ready?" Edward asked. Naomi touched her flat stomach. She thought about the silver needle. She thought about her baby. "I'm ready," she said. Her voice was cold and hard. The driver opened the doors. A massive roar of voices hit them instantly. The photographers started yelling Edward's name. The cameras flashed so fast it looked like lightning. Edward stepped out first. He stood tall, looking completely bored by the chaos. Then he reached his hand back inside the car. Naomi put her hand in his. She stepped out of the car. The dark black silk of her dress caught the flashing lights. The yelling stopped. For one solid second, the entire crowd went completely silent. Every single reporter and photographer stopped moving. They all knew about the wedding. They all expected Edward to walk out with Seline Park, the beautiful shipping heiress. Instead, he was holding the hand of a completely unknown woman wearing a dress that cost a fortune, with a ruby the size of a golf ball around her neck. Then the crowd exploded. The shouting was twice as loud as before. People were screaming questions. "Mr. Kang, who is she? Edward, where is Seline? Is the wedding cancelled? Who is the woman in the black dress?" Edward didn't answer a single question. He just tightened his grip on Naomi's hand. He pulled her close to his side. He didn't rush. He walked her slowly up the red carpet. He made sure every single camera got a perfect picture of them together. Naomi kept her head up. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She channeled every single bit of Edward's coldness. She looked at the flashing cameras like they were completely beneath her. They reached the top of the stairs and walked through the heavy glass doors into the hotel lobby. It was much quieter inside, but the tension was worse. The lobby was full of rich people wearing expensive suits and sparkling gowns. The moment Edward and Naomi walked in, the music playing in the background seemed to stop. Every head turned to look at them. People started whispering behind their hands. Naomi felt 100 sets of eyes burning into her skin. They were judging her. They were trying to figure out who she was and where she came from. Edward leaned down to her ear. "Keep your head up, you own this room." He led her past the staring crowds and pushed open the massive double doors that led into the main ballroom. The room was huge. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing bright light over hundreds of round tables covered in white silk. At the far end of the room was a large stage. Standing on the stage, holding a microphone, was an older man with grey hair and a sharp face. It was Mr. Park, Seline's father. He was in the middle of a sentence, talking about charity and giving back to the city, but when the double doors opened, he stopped talking. He looked up. He saw Edward, and he saw Naomi. Mr. Park's face turned completely red. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a loud, terrible screeching noise that made everyone in the room cover their ears. The entire ballroom turned to look at the doors. Edward didn't hesitate. He started walking right down the middle of the room, straight toward the stage. Naomi walked right beside him, her tall heels clicking loudly on the hard floor. The crowd of rich people literally stepped back to get out of their way. It felt like walking through the Red Sea. "Edward Kang," Mr. Park yelled from the stage. His voice was shaking with anger. He didn't even pick up the microphone. "What the hell are you doing here? You broke the contract this morning. You stole my union drivers. You have no right to be in this building." Edward stopped right in front of the stage. He let go of Naomi's hand. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a white envelope. "I am here to return your wedding invitations, Mr. Park," Edward said loudly. His deep voice carried through the silent room easily. "I am cancelling the merger, and I am cancelling the wedding." He tossed the white envelope onto the stage. It landed right at Mr. Park's feet. A huge gasp went through the entire room. People started talking over each other in shocked whispers. This was the biggest scandal the city had seen in 10 years. A billionaire cancelling a wedding in front of 500 people at the bride's own charity event. "You are a snake," Mr. Park screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Edward. "You ruined my company today. You think you can just walk in here and humiliate my family." "Your family humiliated itself," Edward said coldly. Your daughter is a spoiled, dangerous child. I will never let her name attach to mine. Don't you talk about my daughter, Mr. Park roared. Then tell your daughter to stop sending death threats to the woman I actually care about, Edward shot back. He turned around and reached his hand out to Naomi. The whole room gasped again. All eyes landed on Naomi. She felt her heart hammer in her chest, but she didn't show it. She took Edward's hand and let him pull her slightly forward, right into the center of the spotlight. This is Naomi, Edward announced to the silent room. He wrapped his arm tightly around her waist. She is the only woman who matters to me, and if anyone in your family ever comes near her again, I won't just take your union drivers, Mr. Park. I will take everything you own and leave you sleeping on the street. He didn't yell. He said it with deadly calm. It was the scariest threat Naomi had ever heard. Mr. Park looked like he was going to have a heart attack. He grabbed his chest, his face turning purple. Suddenly, a loud, high-pitched scream ripped through the ballroom. You bitch! Naomi spun her head around. Seline was charging through the crowd. She was wearing a bright white dress looking like a crazy bride. Her hair was completely messy. Her eyes were wide and wild. She was holding something in her hand. It looked like a heavy glass champagne bottle. She wasn't looking at Edward. She was looking right at Naomi. You stole him from me, Seline screamed, running as fast as she could in her high heels. She raised the heavy glass bottle high over her head. I am going to kill you. The heavy glass bottle was aimed straight at Naomi's head. Seline was screaming, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure hate. Naomi's heart stopped beating. Her legs felt glued to the floor. She wanted to throw her hands up to protect her face, to protect her stomach. But she didn't have to. Edward moved faster than any human should be able to move. He stepped right in front of Naomi, completely shielding her with his broad shoulders. He didn't duck. He didn't back away. He reached his hand out and caught Seline's wrist right as she swung the bottle down. The sound of his hand hitting her arm was a loud, wet smack. Seline gasped. The heavy green bottle slipped from her fingers. It hit the hard marble floor and completely shattered. Expensive champagne and sharp glass exploded everywhere, splashing the bottom of Naomi's black dress. Edward didn't let go of Seline's wrist. His face was a mask of cold, dark rage. I warned you, Edward growled. His voice was so low it vibrated in the quiet room. He twisted her arm. He didn't do it slowly. He jerked his hand hard to the side. A sickening pop echoed through the ballroom. Seline let out a high, terrible scream. Her legs gave out completely. She dropped to her knees right into the puddle of champagne and broken glass. She grabbed her shoulder with her free hand, crying and screaming in pure agony. Her white dress soaked up the spilled wine, making it look like dark blood. The entire room erupted into total chaos. Women screamed, men yelled. Hotel security guards started running toward the stage from every door. Mr. Park jumped off the stage. He ran toward his daughter, his face pale with shock. Seline, oh my God, someone call an ambulance. He looked up at Edward. Tears of anger were running down the older man's face. You broke her arm, you are a monster. I will have you locked in a cell for the rest of your life. Edward finally let go of Seline's wrist. He looked down at the crying billionaire heiress on the floor. He didn't feel sorry for her at all. Call the police, Edward said, his voice easily cutting through the loud noise of the room. Tell them your daughter tried to attack my partner with a glass weapon in front of 500 witnesses. Tell them I defended my family. Let us see who goes to jail tonight. Mr. Park stopped yelling. He looked at the broken bottle. He looked at the hundreds of people holding up their cell phones, recording every single second of the mess. He knew Edward was right. Seline attacked first. If they went to the police, the Park family would look even worse. Edward took a step closer to the older man. Keep your crazy daughter away from my house. Keep her away from Naomi. If she ever tries to send another threat, if she ever comes within 10 miles of us again, I won't just break her arm. I will break her neck. Mr. Park slowly backed away. He pulled his crying daughter up from the floor, hiding her face in his chest. They looked completely defeated. The great Park family was broken. Edward turned around. He looked at Naomi. His dark eyes dragged over her face, checking for cuts from the glass. Are you hurt? He asked quickly. No, Naomi breathed. Her whole body was shaking now. The adrenaline was crashing hard. I'm okay. Good, he said. He grabbed her hand. His grip was tight and warm. We are leaving. He didn't wait for the security guards to ask questions. He pulled Naomi through the crowd. The rich people parted for them like they were royalty. Nobody said a word. They were all too scared. Edward had just taken down the king of the city and broken the princess's arm without even breaking a sweat. They pushed through the heavy double doors and walked out into the lobby. The flashing lights of the cameras started again. The reporters had heard the screaming from inside. They were hungry for the story. "Keep your head up," Edward whispered in her ear. Naomi squeezed his hand. She lifted her chin. She stared straight ahead at the flashing lights. She didn't look like a scared maid anymore. She looked like a woman who could survive a war. They walked down the red carpet and got into the waiting black car. The driver slammed the door shut, cutting off the noise and the flashing lights. The car instantly pulled away from the curb, speeding into the dark city streets. The heavy silence in the car was thick. Naomi leaned her head back against the leather seat. She closed her eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. Her chest was rising and falling fast. She placed her hand flat against her stomach. The baby was safe. Seline was gone. They had actually done it. "You didn't flinch." Edward's voice broke the quiet. Naomi opened her eyes and looked at him. He was sitting in the corner of the wide seat watching her. His tie was slightly crooked from grabbing Seline. His eyes were completely dark, burning with that crazy, intense energy again. "When she swung the bottle at you," Edward said softly, leaning closer, "you didn't try to cover your face, you didn't try to run, you just stood there." "You said you would protect me," Naomi replied. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I believed you." Edward let out a rough sound in the back of his throat. It sounded almost like a growl. The fact that she trusted him, the fact that she stood her ground while a crazy woman charged at her, completely undid him. He crossed the wide seat in one fast move. He grabbed her waist and pulled her right onto his lap. Naomi gasped as she straddled his legs. The tight black silk of her dress rode up her thighs. He didn't give her a second to think. He wrapped his hands in her carefully styled hair, pulling the pins loose so her thick curls fell around her shoulders. He pulled her face down and kissed her. It wasn't a soft, romantic kiss. It was violent. It was desperate. He kissed her like he needed to prove she was really there, like he needed to taste the victory on her lips. He tasted like expensive whiskey and pure adrenaline. Naomi didn't pull away. She grabbed his broad shoulders and kissed him back just as hard. The fear and the crazy excitement of the night mixed together, turning into a hot, heavy fire in her stomach. She felt the power of the dark dress, the heavy ruby around her neck, and the billionaire holding her like she was the most important thing in the world. His hands moved down her back, tracing the bare skin exposed by the open dress. He gripped her hips, pulling her tighter against him. The car hit a bump, throwing them closer together. "You belong to me," Edward breathed against her mouth. "Only me." "I know," she whispered back, completely losing herself in the heat of his touch. The drive back to the mansion felt like it took 5 minutes. When the car pulled to a stop in the dark driveway, Edward didn't even wait for the driver to open the door. He kicked it open himself. He grabbed Naomi's hand and pulled her out into the cool night air. He didn't let go of her hand. He dragged her up the front steps and pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The house was completely quiet. The staff was asleep. Edward locked the door behind them. He turned to her. He didn't say a single word. He just picked her up. He scooped her right off her feet, holding her against his chest like she weighed nothing. Naomi wrapped her arms around his neck. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling his fast, strong heartbeat. He carried her up the glass stairs, his heavy black shoes making loud thuds on the steps. He kicked the door to the master bedroom open and carried her inside. He didn't turn on the main lights. Only the soft yellow lamps on the nightstands were glowing. He dropped her onto the giant bed. The grey silk sheets felt cool against her hot skin. Edward stood over her. He took off his suit jacket and threw it on the floor. He ripped his tie off. He unbuttoned his white shirt, moving fast, his eyes never leaving hers. "You were perfect tonight," he said. His voice was thick and raspy. "You walked into a room full of wolves and you made them all bow to you." "I had the biggest wolf standing right next to me," Naomi replied. She sat up slightly, resting back on her hands. Edward smiled. It was a dark, dangerous smile. He crawled onto the bed, his knees sinking into the soft mattress. He leaned over her, trapping her between his arms. He reached out and touched the heavy ruby resting on her chest. "You are never taking this off," he murmured. "And you are never leaving my side. You are the queen of this house now. You tell the staff what to do, you tell the guards who is allowed inside. Everything I own is yours." Naomi looked up into his black eyes. He wasn't playing a game anymore. He wasn't trying to scare her. He was completely surrendering his power to her because she was carrying his child and because she was strong enough to stand beside him. "What about Seline?" Naomi asked quietly. "Will she try again?" "Her father's company will be completely bankrupt by Friday," Edward said, leaning down to kiss the soft skin of her neck. "She will have no money to pay guards. She will have no friends to hide her. If she ever shows her face in this city again, my men will make sure she disappears quietly. You never have to worry about her again." Naomi closed her eyes as his lips moved across her jawline. The war was over. The poor maid from the dirty apartment had just defeated a billionaire heiress. But as Edward's hands moved over her body, claiming her, marking her as his forever, Naomi knew a new kind of war was just starting. She was locked in a golden cage with a monster who loved her. She had the money. She had the power. She had her grandmother safe down the hall. But she also knew that monsters didn't change. Edward was ruthless. He destroyed people for fun, and now she was his favorite obsession. She had weaponized him to save her baby, but now she had to figure out how to live with him. "Edward," she gasped as he pulled the black silk dress off her shoulders. "I'm right here," he promised, his voice heavy with desire. "I will always be right here." For the rest of the night, the giant, cold house didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a fortress. Naomi let him take completely over. She let the darkness swallow her, knowing that as long as she held his heart, she held the keys to the kingdom. The next morning, Naomi woke up to the sound of soft rain hitting the glass windows. The bed was empty beside her, but the sheets still smelled like his cedar cologne. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her waist. Her body ached in a good way. She looked over at the small table in the corner. A silver tray was sitting there. On top of the tray was a plate of fresh fruit, a piece of dry toast for her stomach, and a hot cup of tea. Next to the food was a folded newspaper. Naomi got out of bed. She walked over to the table and picked up the paper. The front page was entirely covered by a massive picture. It was a picture of her and Edward walking out of the Grand Hotel. Edward looked tall and deadly. Naomi looked beautiful and cold. Her black dress and red ruby shined under the camera lights. The headline was written in giant, bold letters: "The Fall of the Park Empire. Billionaire Edward Kangcancels wedding for mystery woman." Naomi read the first few lines of the article. It talked about how Mr. Park's company stocks crashed overnight. It talked about Seline's crazy attack and her broken arm. It said the Park family was leaving the country to avoid the shame. It was over, it was really over. The heavy bedroom door pushed open. Edward walked in. He was already dressed in a sharp grey suit for work. He stopped when he saw her standing by the table, holding the newspaper. "Did you read it?" he asked. "Yes," Naomi said. She set the paper down. "They really left the country." "They took a private jet to Europe at 4 a.m, Edward said smoothly. He walked over to her. He reached out and placed his warm hand flat against her stomach. "They will never bother you again." Naomi looked down at his hand, then up at his face. "So what happens now?" "Now," Edward smiled. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Now you rest, you eat your toast, you go downstairs and visit your grandmother, and you let me build the rest of the world around you." He turned and walked toward the door. "Edward," Naomi called out. He stopped and looked back at her. "Yes." "Rule number 2, Naomi said slowly. Her voice was calm and steady. "You told me rule number 2 was that I only answer to you." Edward tilted his head. "That is correct." "I think we need to change the rules," Naomi said. She crossed her arms over her chest. "If I am the queen of this house, then the staff answers to me, the guards answer to me, and when it comes to this baby, you answer to me." Edward stared at her for a long time. The silence in the room stretched out. Naomi held her breath. She was testing the limits of her new power. She needed to know if she was really a partner or just a very shiny pet. Slowly, the dark, dangerous smile returned to Edward's face. He didn't look angry. He looked incredibly proud. "Rule number 2 is officially changed," Edward said quietly. "Whatever you want, Naomi, it is yours." He opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone in the master bedroom. Naomi let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She walked over to the giant window and looked out at the rainy cliffside. The dark clouds were heavy over Seattle, but inside the mansion, things were completely different. She wasn't the scared maid anymore. She wasn't the desperate girl trying to pay off a broken watch. She was Naomi Kang, and she was going to rule the Dark Empire with an iron fist. 6 months passed like a long, dark dream. The cold winter rain of Seattle turned into bright, hot summer sun. The massive mansion on the cliff didn't feel like a cold museum anymore. It felt alive. It felt like it belonged to Naomi. She sat behind the giant dark wood desk in Edward's office. She was wearing a soft black dress that stretched tightly over her large, round belly. She was 8 months pregnant. Her back ached constantly and her feet were swollen, but she refused to stay in bed. She liked sitting in this leather chair. She liked the power it gave her. She stared down at a stack of white papers. They were security logs. She traced her finger down the list of names and times. She stopped at a name near the bottom. Maria, Naomi called out without looking up. The office door opened immediately. Maria walked in, drying her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell the head of security to come to the office right now," Naomi said, keeping her voice completely flat. "Right away," Maria nodded and hurried out. 5 minutes later, a tall, thick man in a black suit walked into the office. His name was Thomas. He had a scar over his left eye. He was a hard, dangerous man who only answered to Edward, until now. "You asked for me, Miss Naomi?" Thomas asked. He stood stiffly in front of the desk. Naomi leaned back in the heavy leather chair. She folded her hands over her stomach. "Look at the log from yesterday afternoon, Gate 3. Thomas stepped forward and looked at the paper on the desk. He frowned. "A delivery truck. They brought the new furniture for the baby's room." "How long were they at the gate before they were cleared?" she asked. 2 minutes, Thomas answered. 2 minutes, Naomi repeated slowly. She stared right into the big man's eyes. "It takes 5 minutes to properly scan a truck that size. It takes 3 minutes just to run the driver's background check, which means your men at Gate 3 opened my gate without checking who was inside that truck." Thomas swallowed hard. A drop of sweat rolled down his thick neck. I will speak to them, ma'am. It won't happen again." "You are damn right it won't happen again," Naomi said. Her voice dropped, sounding exactly like Edward when he was angry. "Because those 2 men are fired. Tell them to pack their shit and leave the property in 10 minutes. And if I ever catch you getting lazy with the gates again, Thomas, I will fire you too. Do you understand me?" Thomas went completely pale. "Yes, ma'am, completely understood." "Get out," she ordered. Thomas turned and walked out of the office faster than he came in. He shut the door quietly behind him. Naomi let out a long breath and rubbed her temples. The baby kicked hard against her ribs. She winced and placed her hand over the spot, rubbing in slow circles. "You are turning into a tyrant." Naomi jumped slightly. She looked up. Edward was leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing dark jeans and a tight black t-shirt. His dark hair was messy. He had his arms crossed over his chest, and a slow, proud smile was spread across his face. He watched her fire his best security guard, and he looked completely turned on by it. "They were getting lazy," Naomi defended herself, sitting up straighter. "Lazy gets people hurt. I won't let anyone get lazy around this baby." Edward pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room. He walked around the desk and stopped right beside her chair. He didn't look mad that she was giving orders. He looked like he wanted to fall on his knees and worship her. He leaned down and placed his large, warm hand directly over hers on her stomach. The baby kicked again, right against his palm. Edward's dark eyes softened for just a second. "You did the right thing," he murmured, leaning closer to kiss her neck. "Fire them all if you want to. I will buy you a whole new army." "I don't need a new army," she sighed, letting her head fall back against his shoulder. "I just need the one we have to follow the rules." Edward hummed in agreement. He pulled a thick white envelope out of his back pocket and dropped it onto the desk right in front of her. Naomi looked at it. It didn't have a name on it. It just had a thick red wax seal holding it shut. "What is this?" she asked, sitting forward again. "Open it," he told her. He stepped back and leaned against the edge of the desk, watching her closely. Naomi picked up the envelope. She broke the red wax with her thumb and pulled out a stack of heavy paper. She started reading the first page. The legal words were confusing at first, but she quickly realized what she was holding. It was a contract. It was a transfer of ownership. She looked at the numbers. They were massive. Edward, she breathed, her eyes going wide. This is half of your entire company. This is half of the new shipping line, and the deed to this house. It is all in your name, he said simply. He crossed his arms again, looking completely calm. I transferred it this morning. You own 50% of everything I have built. Naomi stared at him. Her hands started to shake. She put the papers down on the desk. Why, we aren't married. If you give me this, I could take it and leave you. I could take half your money and disappear. I know, he said, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The crazy, possessive fire burned bright in them. That is exactly why I did it. I don't understand, she whispered. Edward pushed off the desk. He crouched down next to her chair, resting his hands on the armrests, trapping her in. He looked up at her face. I bought you for $3 million, Edward said quietly. The memory of that terrible, rainy day hung in the air between them. I locked you in a cage because I wanted to own you. I thought money could buy loyalty. I thought fear could force you to stay. Naomi didn't speak. She just looked at him, her heart beating fast. But fear doesn't work on you, he continued. He reached out and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed over her skin gently. You stood in front of a crazy woman with a glass bottle and didn't even blink. You fired my head of security without asking my permission. You aren't scared of me anymore, Naomi. No, she agreed softly. I'm not. If you aren't scared and you don't owe me money, then the cage is broken, Edward said. His voice was thick and heavy. The only reason you are still here is because you choose to be. I am giving you half my empire so you know you always have a choice. You don't need me to survive anymore. Naomi looked down at the papers. Half a billionaire's empire. She was richer than Seline Park ever was. She could buy a private island. She could buy 100 silver watches. She could take her grandmother and her baby and live like a queen anywhere in the world. She looked back down at the dangerous, beautiful man kneeling next to her chair. He was the monster who dragged her into the dark. He was the boss who treated her like trash. But he was also the man who destroyed a whole family just to keep her safe. He was the father of her child. He was hers, she owned him completely. You think giving me all this money means I am going to pack my bags? Naomi asked. A slow, sharp smile touched her lips. She reached out and grabbed the collar of his black t-shirt. She pulled him closer. Edward didn't resist. He let her pull him in. I think it means you hold the gun now. I do, she whispered. Her lips were just inches from his. And I say we keep the house. Moving is too much work. Edward let out a rough laugh. He closed the distance and kissed her hard. It was a deep, hungry kiss. It didn't feel like a boss kissing his maid. It felt like two equals, two rulers of a dark kingdom sealing a deal in blood. He pulled away just enough to look at her lips. Marry me. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. No, Naomi said smoothly. Edward froze, his eyes narrowed. The possessive edge came right back. What do you mean, no? I mean I don't want a big, stupid wedding, she said, trailing her fingers into his dark hair. I don't want a white dress. I don't want a room full of rich people taking pictures of us. I saw what a rich wedding looked like. It was fake and disgusting. Then what do you want? He asked, his voice rough. I want a judge, Naomi said. I want to sign a piece of paper in this office. Just you, me, my grandmother, and the baby, nobody else. I don't want the world looking at what belongs to me. Edward stared at her. The dark, greedy look on her face mirrored his own perfectly. She had learned his rules and she was playing the game better than he ever did. She didn't want to share him with the public. She wanted to keep him locked away for herself. Tomorrow, he promised, kissing her jaw. I will have a judge here tomorrow morning. Good, she breathed, tightening her grip on his hair. You are entirely too much trouble, he groaned, moving his kisses down to her neck. I should have let you walk out the door the day you broke my watch. But you didn't, Naomi smiled, closing her eyes, because you like the trouble. I love the trouble, he corrected her, his voice a low rumble against her skin. They stayed in the office for a long time, ignoring the security logs and the massive empire waiting outside the door. Later that night the house was quiet. Naomi walked down the hallway to the east wing. She opened the door to the yellow guest room. The room was warm and smelled like fresh flowers. Her grandmother was asleep in the nice bed. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. The nurse was reading quietly in the corner. Naomi stood in the doorway for a minute, just watching. Her grandmother was safe. She would never have to worry about hospital bills or late rent ever again. She was protected by thick walls, heavy gates, and the most dangerous man in the city. Naomi turned and walked back down the hall. She touched the heavy silver ruby necklace around her neck. She wore it every single day. It was her crown. She walked into the master bedroom. The room was dark, lit only by the city lights shining through the large glass windows. Edward was standing by the window, looking out at the water. He was holding a glass of dark whiskey. He turned around when he heard her footsteps. "She is sleeping," Naomi said quietly, walking toward him. "Good," Edward said. He set his glass down on a small table. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He wrapped his hands around her waist, resting them gently on her pregnant belly. Naomi leaned back against his chest. She looked out the window at the dark water. A year ago she was scrubbing toilets and crying over bus fare. She was invisible. She was a ghost walking through the rich parts of the city, desperate and tired. Then she broke a $3 million watch. It was the worst mistake of her life. It was the thing that dragged her into the dark, twisted world of a billionaire who didn't know how to love without leaving bruises. He tried to break her. He tried to lock her in a golden cage and throw away the key. But Naomi didn't break. She learned how to bite back. She learned how to use his power against the people who wanted to hurt her. She weaponized his obsession, turning the monster into her ultimate shield. "Are you happy, Naomi?" Edward asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Naomi looked at the city lights. She thought about the money in her name. She thought about the baby kicking in her stomach. She thought about the heavy, consuming love she felt for the dangerous man holding her. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't polite or normal or safe. It was messy, dark, and completely entirely theirs. "Yes," Naomi whispered, turning her head to kiss his cheek. "I am exactly where I belong." She didn't escape the devil. She just married him and took half his hell for herself.